Hello and welcome to Alden Carrow's Poetry Podcast. I'm Alden Carrow, author of Cumbria in Verse, Lakes to Fells in Poetry. This show is about slowing down, listening closely, and discovering the poetry that lives in both the extraordinary and the everyday. Each episode, I begin with a guest poem, something from the wider world of poetry that has inspired me or continues to resonate. After that, I'll share one of my own pieces. Then finally, I will discuss the best platform for publishing ebooks and why. Today, we are turning our gaze toward the immense, the crushing, and the undeniably resilient. We're looking at the intersection of the divine and the physical world, exploring how pressure, whether it be the pressure of industry, the pressure of geology, or the pressure of the spirit, shapes the landscape of our lives. To begin this exploration, I've chosen a sonnet that is perhaps one of the most explosive and electrically charged pieces of literature from the Victorian era. It's God's Grandeur by Gerard Manley Hopkins. Hopkins was a Jesuit priest, a man deeply conflicted by his own creativity and his religious devotion. Yet in his poetry we find a fusion of the two that is unparalleled. He wrote in a time of rapid industrialization, seeing the green fields of England blackened by the soot and the human spirit dulled by repetitive labour. The Manchester mills churned day and night, the coal mines of Durham sent men underground before dawn, and the rivers ran with industrial waste. Hopkins witnessed what we now call the Anthropocene in its infancy, the age when human activity began to leave an indelible mark on the geological record. Yet he did not see this as the end. He saw a subterranean power, a geological and theological force that could not be spent. I chose this poem because it speaks to the theme of our episode, the idea that beneath the surface of trade and toil, beneath the smearing of the human hand, there is a freshness deep down in things. It fits our theme of geological violence and transformation because Hopkins describes a world that is charged, not static, but vibrating with a terrifying and beautiful energy, much like the volcanic forces we will discuss later. There is a violence in renewal, a pressure required for transformation. Before I read it, I want you to listen for the specific tactile imagery Hopkins uses. He doesn't just say God is great, he uses the language of physics and mechanics. He speaks of electricity, of oil being crushed, of soil being worn bare. It's a very physical poem. It acknowledges the damage we do to the earth, the searing and the smearing, but it refuses to succumb to despair. It posits that the earth possesses a regenerative power, a dearest freshness that operates on a timescale and a magnitude far beyond human comprehension. This is not some vague spiritual platitude. Hopkins is talking about actual geological processes, the slow, grinding work of tectonic forces, the patient accumulation of sediment, the inevitable renewal of topsoil through the decay of organic matter. He saw the sacred in the physical, the divine in the dirt. Listen to the rhythm, his famous sprung rhythm, which mimics the natural cadence of speech but heightens it, creating a sense of urgency and bursting pressure. Unlike the predictable lambic pentameter of his contemporaries, Hopkins' rhythm lurches and surges. It feels unstable, on the edge of chaos, yet held together by an invisible structure, much like a mountain held together by internal pressure, even as it slowly crumbles. The world is charged with the grandeur of God. It will flame out like shining from shook foil. It gathers to a greatness like the ooze of oil crushed. Why do men now not wreck his rod? Generations have trod, and all is smeared with trade, bleared, smeared with toil. and wears man's smudge and shares man's smell. The soil is bare now, nor can feet feel being shod. And for all this, nature is never spent. There lives the dearest freshness deep down things. And though the last lights off the black west went, O morning at the brown brink eastward springs, because the Holy Ghost over the bent world broods with warm breast and with bright wings. There's violence in that opening line, isn't there? The world is charged. It's not painted with God's grandeur. It's charged with it like a battery, or perhaps like a storm cloud waiting to release a lightning strike. Hopkins gives us two metaphors for this power right away. First, like shining from shook foil. If you've ever taken a piece of gold leaf or tin foil and shaken it, you know how the light fractures and flashes. It's sudden, jagged and unpredictable. That is the nature of the divine for Hopkins. It isn't a soft glow, it's a sudden, blinding flash. Then he shifts immediately to a geological and agricultural metaphor, like the ooze of oil crushed. This refers to the pressing of olives to get oil. Here greatness comes from pressure, it comes from being crushed. This ties directly into our theme of geological violence. The earth itself is formed through crushing pressure. Metamorphic rock is defined by it. Limestone becomes marble through heat and pressure deep underground. Shell becomes slate. Coal becomes diamond. Hopkins suggests that spiritual greatness operates on the same principle. Beauty and power emerge from compression, from being subjected to forces that would destroy lesser materials. The middle octave of the sonnet is a lament for the Anthropocene, long before we heard that word. Generations have trod, have trod, have trod. The repetition of trod mimics the heavy, dull footsteps of humanity marching over the earth, oblivious to the magic beneath their feet. He says the world is seared with trade, bleared, smeared with toil. These are ugly, viscous words. Smeared suggests a loss of definition, a blurring of the crisp lines of nature. The earth has been muddied, obscured, made illegible by our activity. And we've insulated ourselves, nor can foot feel being shod. We wear shoes, we pave the roads. We've lost contact with the earth. This is not a minor observation. Hopkins is identifying the fundamental alienation of industrial society from the natural world. We walk upon the earth without truly touching it. We consume its resources without feeling the weight of what we take. But then comes the volta, the turn, and for all this, nature is never spent. This is the deep time perspective. Despite the human smearing, the dearest freshness deep down things remains. It's subterranean, it's waiting. The image of the Holy Ghost brooding over the bent world is profoundly moving. The world is bent, perhaps by gravity, perhaps by the weight of sin or industry, but the protective, incubating spirit remains. The word broods is crucial here. It suggests a hen sitting on eggs, generating warmth, waiting for new life to hatch. It's patient. It operates on geological time. This is a poem of resilience, asserting that the violence of human industry is temporary, while the deep down freshness is eternal. Moving from the theological pressure of Hopkins to the literal geological pressure of the British landscape, I want to take you now to the Lake District, specifically to Cumbria. My poem today is titled Langdale Pikes. If you've ever hiked in the Langdales, you know that these are not gentle, rolling hills. They are jagged, aggressive and stark. The geology here is fascinating. It's the result of a massive volcanic caldera collapsing upon itself hundreds of millions of years ago. The Borrowdale volcanic group formed roughly 450 million years ago during the Ordovician period, created the dramatic landscape we see today. Just imagine a volcano the size of Mount St. Helens erupting repeatedly, spewing ash and lava across what was then an ocean floor. Eventually, the magma chamber beneath emptied and the roof collapsed inward, creating a massive crater. Over the millennia, this volcanic material was compressed, tilted and carved by successive ice ages. The beauty we see today is the scar tissue of a cataclysmic event. I wrote this poem after a hike up to the Pikes, observing the loose rock, the scree, and thinking about how the mountain is slowly dismantling itself. We think of mountains as permanent, but in the scope of deep time, they're fluid. They're falling down very slowly. Every winter, water seeps into cracks, freezes, expands, and splits the rock a fraction wider. Every spring thaw, another flake breaks free and tumbles down the scree slope. The mountain's not static, it's actively collapsing, grain by grain, towards the valley floor. In this piece, I wanted to capture the sense of verticality that defines the Langdales. There is a sensation when you look over the edge of the scarp, a suddenness of air. I also wanted to look closely at the debitage, a term often used in archaeology for waste flakes of stone tools, but here used to describe the shattered rock debris of the mountain itself. This poem explores the tension between the trudge of boots, our brief human visitation, and the eternal pressure of the stone, which operates on a timescale we can barely conceive. Here is my poem, Langdale Pikes. The chamber emptied and the crust collapsed, tilting the strata 20 steep degrees. Now the scarp is a suddenness of air, a verticality where the valley floor is lost to the drop. Glaciers plucked the lee side into jagged blocks, leaving a ridge worn smooth by the trudge of boots. They rubbed the grey leach into bare slick rock above the deep, circular scars of the pigeonholes. Beneath the buttress, the scree lies loose and vast. Fans of green tuff, shattered into sharp-edged flakes, hang in a suspension that only looks like rest. This debitage, unfinished, sharp and cold, shifts a millimetre closer to the beck with every frost. The vertical line breaks into a saturated plane, where the gradient slackens in orange moss. Here, the gale shears across the sodden peat, stripping the soil until only the wind-flattened stems remain. Ice fills the fissures, a slow and expanding wedge shattering the volcanic substrate from within. At dusk, the last walkers ebb towards the floor, leaving the summit to the cloud's occlusion and the silent, internal pressure of the stone. In writing Langdale Pikes, I was obsessed with the physics of destruction. The poem begins with the ancient geological event, the chamber emptied and the crust collapsed. This refers to the volcanic origins of the site. The landscape we admire is actually a ruin, a collapsed roof of a magma chamber. The phrase, tilting the strata 20 steep degrees, attempts to ground the reader in the sheer disorientation of that place. When you're up there, the ground beneath you feels angry, angular. The rock layers don't lie horizontal as they once did. They've been thrust upward, tilted, deformed by unimaginable forces. I use the word suddenness to describe the air at the cliff edge because that's how it feels somatically. The ground vanishes and the void rushes in. It's a visceral experience, a moment when your body understands, in a primal way, the power of gravity and the fragility of your position. The second stanza contrasts the glaciers, agents of deep time, with the trudge of boots. Just like in Hopkins' poem, where generations trod, here the walkers rub the lichen away. We police the landscape with our feet, polishing the rock, but we are insignificant compared to the ice. The last glaciers retreated from the Lake District around 11,500 years ago, yet their work, the U-shaped valleys, the hanging valleys, the corries, still defines the landscape. Our footpaths, by contrast, are ephemeral scratches. The heart of the poem for me lies in the description of the scree, fans of green tuff shattered into sharp-edged flakes. Tuff is volcanic ash that has solidified into rock. It's incredibly hard, yet here it is shattered. I describe it as hanging in a suspension that only looks like rest. This is the crux of the theme, deep time versus human transience. To our eyes, the mountain is still. To the mountain, it's flowing like water, just very, very slowly. The scree shifts a millimetre closer to the beck with every frost. It's a slow-motion avalanche, imperceptible in a human lifetime, but inextricable over centuries. The ending of the poem brings in the mechanism of this violence. Ice fills the fissures, a slow and expanding wedge. This is freeze-thaw weathering, one of the most powerful erosive forces in temperate climates. It's a silent explosion happening inside the rock every winter night. Water expands by approximately 9% when it freezes. That expansion exerts pressure of up to 30,000 pounds per square inch, enough to split granite. The poem ends by removing the human element entirely. At dusk, the last walkers ebb toward the floor. We leave. We must leave. We cannot survive the conditions up there. We leave the summit to the clouds' occlusion and the silent internal pressure of the stone. That pressure is the enduring reality of the earth. Our presence is just a fleeting shadow upon it. Now it's on to our discussion segment. We've spent a lot of time today talking about rocks, strata, and the slow movement of heavy things. Now I want to pivot to something that might seem disconnected, but it's actually about how we move our own heavy things, our words, our collections, our art, out into the world. In the digital age, we don't need to carve our poems into stone for them to last, nor do we rely solely on the slow erosion of traditional publishing. We have tools that allow us to scatter our work like seeds, or perhaps like the scree shifting down the mountain, across the entire digital landscape. Today, I want to talk about a specific tool that I use and highly recommend for independent poets and authors, Draft2D. If you have ever written a collection of poetry, a memoir or a novel, and you want to publish it as an ebook, you're faced with a choice. You can upload your file directly to Amazon Kindle Direct Publishing, which is the giant in the room. But if you stop there, you're missing out on a vast ecosystem of readers who use Apple Books, Kobo, Barnes & Noble Nook, and perhaps most importantly, library systems like Overdrive, Baker & Taylor, and Biblioteca. Managing all those accounts individually is a headache. It takes time away from writing. This is where Draft2D acts as an essential aggregator. Think of them as a distribution hub. You upload your manuscript once, just one Word document, and they convert it, format it, and push it out to all those storefronts and libraries simultaneously. Let's talk about the process because it's surprisingly poetic in its simplicity. You don't need to be a coding wizard. You don't need to know how to build an EPUB file from scratch. You simply take your clean Word document, upload it to their dashboard, and their automated conversion tool handles the rest. It even adds the front matter and back matter, your copyright page, your dedication, your also by the author list. It strips away the technical barriers that often keep poets silent. One feature I particularly love is the Universal Book Link, or UBL. When you publish through Draft2D, they give you one URL, or UBL. When a reader clicks it, they're shown a landing page where they can choose their preferred store. If they read on Kobo, they click Kobo. If they read on Apple, they click Apple. This is crucial for marketing. Instead of cluttering your social media posts with 5 different links, you just share one. It guides the reader, like a cairn on a hiking trail, exactly where they need to go. It respects the reader's ecosystem while ensuring your work is accessible everywhere. But let's go deeper into the philosophy of this. Why does wide distribution matter? In our discussion of Hopkins and the Langdales, we talked about transience. Books that are only available in one place are fragile. If that platform changes its rules, or if an account is locked, the work disappears. By using an aggregator, like Draft2D, to push your work to dozens of platforms globally, you are ensuring the longevity of your work. You're embedding it into the digital strata of the internet. You're placing it in libraries where it can be archived, preserved, discovered decades from now, by readers not yet born. There's also a financial aspect that honours the writer. Draft2D takes a small percentage of the sales, about 10% of the retail price, but there's no upfront fees. This democratises the process. You don't need capital to start, you just need the work. And for poets, whose sales might be a slow trudge rather than a sprint, this model is sustainable. It allows the work to exist, to wait for its reader, just as the stone waits for the walker. Your book sits on digital shelves, patient, accumulating readers slowly over time, rather than demanding immediate commercial success. I also want to mention the library aspect again, because it's dear to my heart. Many independent authors neglect libraries, viewing them as a revenue loss rather than an opportunity. But through Draft2D, your poetry collection can appear in the catalogues of public libraries worldwide. This makes your work accessible to those who can't afford to buy books, to students, to the curious. It allows your poetry to be discovered in the quiet digital stacks. Libraries are one of the truly last democratic institutions we have. They don't ask for your credit card, they ask only for your curiosity. Getting your work into libraries is not just good business, it's also good citizenship. So, if you're sitting on a manuscript, feeling the internal pressure to release it, consider looking into Draft2D. It's an easy way to take the demontage of your creative process, those finished, sharp flakes of thoughts, and ensure they slide down into the valleys where the people are. It's about letting the work flow, honouring its need to move, to find readers, to exist beyond the confines of your hard drive. Just as the scree cannot remain suspended forever, your work cannot remain unpublished indefinitely. Eventually, the pressure must be released. Now you've listened to one of my poems and I've discussed the merits of using Draft2D, I'd love to hear from you. If there's a poem you'd like me to feature as a guest poem in a future episode, please email me at oldhamcarrow78@gmail.com. That's oldhamcarrow78@gmail.com. It could be a classic, something modern, or even a personal favourite that means a lot to you. This way, the podcast becomes a shared journey. So thank you for joining me on this journey. Until next time, may you find the poetry in the everyday, and I will speak to you again on Wednesday.